Hey, it's Greaser Consulting, your Houston for sales engagement. In this video, we're going to introduce you to the functions of sales engagement. Are you ready? Let's go. Hey, thanks for joining us in this video. I think you're really going to love this because from a high level, we're going to talk about all the functions of sales engagement. So this is going to serve as an introduction for you. And then if you want to dive deeper and learn more about each of the functions, we have a video and an article that you can definitely do that with. So we're going to start here. Erica Davis, head of content here at Greaser Consulting, and then our founder, CEO, Jordan Greaser is on here as well. Erica is going to tackle the content-related functions, and then Jordan is going to talk about more of the technical functions that are needed to support a healthy, vibrant, successful sales engagement operation that can be sustained over the long term. Okay, so Erica, let's start off with you. Tell us about, I'll start off with like a content owner. Tell us, what does a content owner do?
The content owner is the kind of the quality control person for the instance. So what they're going to do is receive the requests for content, they're going to approve or deny them, and they're also going to identify stakeholders and relevant assets for the working groups to create that content. They're also responsible for owning the business case of your sales engagement platform and the content creation process that goes with it. And they're also responsible for the high-level strategy. So Theron, to your point about making the strategy last, it's not just kind of a set it and forget it. The sales engagement content is dynamic and it's constantly changing with the needs of the end users. And so the content owner is really responsible for making sure that that strategy is constantly evolving and meeting the needs of the end users.
Got it. All right, what about content manager?
The content manager is the one doing a lot of the hands-on work, and they're also kind of the central point of command. So they work really closely with the content owner, but then they also connect with every other person or every other role or function within the supply chain. Yeah, I think that's the most important thing to know about them is they work cross-departmentally and they're really sort of the central point of command. So they should have visibility into all of the other functions.
Yeah, they've got to be a really good communicator because they've got people to work with and coordinate. So, well, this is kind of self-explanatory, but tell us, content writer, what do they do?
Yeah, well, I think just to make the answer interesting, because I could just say they write content, right? I think that the real interesting part of this question is who performs this function. A lot of times the reps, your reps are your content writers. Sometimes it's the sales manager that's the content writer. Sometimes you might have a dedicated content writer in your org, which is great. Sometimes it might be someone from marketing. Sometimes it might be an outside agency. So the content writer function could be one or many of those options that we just said, and it does, or it can change over time as well. So just because reps are writing content now doesn't mean that the sales manager isn't always also writing some content at some point.
Yeah, and it could also be somebody that, if marketing is creating content, they're translated into actual sales content, right? And
Exactly.
And that way it's sales ready. And then lastly here, for the content functions that are needed to support a healthy sales engagement operation, tell us about content enablement. This one sometimes gets missed.
Yeah, so content enablement works with the end users once the content's already been released to ensure that there's adoption and to ensure that that content is performing well in terms of just being able to be used and fitting the needs of the end users. And so that enablement role is super important just to make sure that all of the work that goes into creating this content and strategizing, that there's someone at the end that can actually apply it to their job and generate revenue, right? That's the whole goal here.
Right, that's right. All right, Jordan, over to you. Tell us about the technical functions that are needed here. Start off with technical admin.
Yeah, so the first thing to note, we're going to talk about a technical admin and technical enablement here in a second. But one thing to note, just like with the content functions, over here on the technical side, depending on the size of your org, how big you are, small you are, the different resources that you have, the types of people that fit into these roles can be really different. So to jump in, I'll jump in with a technical admin. This is the person that's in charge of managing your sales engagement platform instance. They might provision users, they might clean up sequences or cadences, whatever you want to say, that need to be archived, that need to be that they have template problems, whatever that is. They're sort of managing the inner workings of this, making sure reporting is going back and forth, activity between CRM and sales engagement platform, any of that technical nitty-gritty that you need. And the reason I mention it can vary by size of organization, Erica talked about how oftentimes content writers might be SDRs. Well, if you're a startup company, usually your technical admin's like your SDR manager or somebody in sales ops that they just grab out of nowhere. Now, as your organization grows, that technical admin sort of moves away from those roles into more of a, like there's actually somebody dedicated full-time to manage that sales engagement platform, to make sure that things are clean, views are in place, things are optimized, inbound leads are being triggered to automatically receive messaging, all that sort of nuts and bolts stuff.
Great. What about from a technical enablement standpoint? And make sure that you hit on the differences that from a skill set personality standpoint.
Right. So think about technical enablement in a lot of ways like you think about your sort of sales enablement folks, but specifically aligned around this sales engagement platform. So your technical admin that I just talked about, they might be able to build the trigger. They might be able to automatically get something in sequence. They might make sure activities posting back and forth, but they're probably not the trainer that's going to come in and make sure that the team knows how, hey, that lead's going to automatically get put into sequence. So here's the 3 things that you need to say if you connect with somebody, if you run this sequence. Hey, when you're running through a cadence or you're doing tasks in one of these platforms, here's a little trick for you, a way to bring your calendar up while you're talking to somebody. This is the person that ensures that the sales strategy that you've put in place, the sales technology you put in place, and the content you put in place sort of all come together in a meaningful way to make sure you're maximizing your sales engagement platform's usage overall.
Yeah, that's good. I think the key word here is that is execution, right? Your sales team is executing the sales process, but they're using the sales engagement platform to do it. And so without ongoing enablement to help them, get better and better at executing the process, you're going to miss some things. You can't just train folks one time and then expect them to get better at executing the process. You got to have that ongoing enablement.
The key point there is, yes, with technical enablement, you even have to go back often and retrain things you've already done in the past, not just to get new folks up to speed, but to ensure that folks that should know what they're doing are actually doing that work. So it's a key point that this is an ongoing motion within any organization that's using an SEP.
Good. What about, let's talk about the other supporting functions. There has to be someone that is, or it can be multiple people, but performance analyst and then documentation.
Yeah, so Erica, I'll let you start with a performance analyst, and then I'll take it from there.
Yeah, so I think one of the most common questions we get asked on the content team is, what is best practice for subject lines, or what is best practice for sequence length, or for, send schedule on a piece of content. And one of the things that I always say is, well, it depends. You should A/B test that and record results over time. And if you are constantly A/B testing your ideas, but you don't have a strategy for how often you're going to review, what your success metrics look like, when you're going to reiterate, what are sort of the benchmarks that you're starting out with, like you need to figure out a strategy for all of that depending on your goals, your industries, your personas, all of that causes your benchmarks to vary. And so I think people are really starting to understand that, it's more than just clicks and opens and replies that you should be tracking, but it really is, it's tied to greater performance metrics overall. A performance analyst is a really vital function to have on the team.
Yeah, and so there's a couple layers to this. So Erica just talked about sort of the content lens to the performance analyst. And one of the biggest mistakes that teams make whenever they sign up for an SEP is they only think about implementation. So that technical admin that comes in and implements, writes a couple pieces of content, and then lets it go. But they fail to iterate or learn from the data that these SEPs actually pump out. That's one of the beauties of these platforms, is that we finally know what reps are doing. We know when they're calling, we know when they're emailing, we know what's landing, we know what isn't landing. And so at the end of the day, it's not just checking content, which, by the way, if teams that we worked with would do this on the regular, they would see dramatically better results. But it's usually missed. The other side of this coin is also things like, conversations, analyzing call coaching, whatever else, the data that's coming in, checking out those dispositions. So Bobby Sue, for some reason, only has a connect rate of 3%, where Amy Jo has a connect rate of 11%. So when is Bobby Sue calling? Who's he's calling? What persona? Now, when Bobby Sue connects with somebody, he gets a 10% conversion to meeting, but Amy Jo gets a 35% connect to conversion to meeting. So how do we coach around this to sort of change the time that Bobby Sue's calling, or maybe change the talk track a little bit? That's the data that's actually coming back into your reporting. You can pump out of these SEPs in order to make better decisions, do better coaching. And so really you need somebody in that sort of business analyst, performance analyst role from a content perspective, from a call coaching perspective. Additionally, on top of all of this, even just a workflow, right? Like, why in the world can Bobby Sue, on the flip side, write 25 manual emails that get great results, but Amy Jo has trouble with that? So how do we coach the team around this stuff? This is the value that constant iteration and analysis provides, and that data is in these platforms. It's accessible. You just need somebody to check it out, analyze it, and then act on it.
Yeah, interpret the data. That's the big thing. Is someone that knows how to interpret the data that makes sense for to be able to manage and lead folks. What about from a documentation standpoint? I think about what gets documented can be scaled better, right? And there's someone comes to the team or gets promoted and they move on, or leaves and goes to another company, and then all of a sudden someone comes in or one of these functions and they're like, hey, how do I do this? And if there's no documentation in place, then it might spend months, maybe even their first year, trying to figure things out.
Yeah, and I think about this in two different ways: playbook and handbook. So think about like your typical sales playbook, where here's your positioning, here's your pitch, here's the different tools and technologies we use, et cetera. I mean, those are foundational for teams that are just getting off the ground or trying to get unified. But there's also a handbook side of things where, for example, we're going to have an admin handbook where we're going to make sure we know the reason why our sales engagement platform is set up this way. We've turned this dongle on. We're going to allow inbound leads to come into the platform. We're not going to allow leads to be created up into your CRM. To document, here's the business case of why we made that decision. Here's the reason why we have this, and this is why the platform itself does this functionality. To your point, Theron, it's huge if somebody moves on from the org to have a place where when somebody else comes in, they don't just go, oh, well, this is ridiculous. Why is it signed up like this? Let me just change everything. Whoa, wait a minute. There's a process here. There's a reason. So you need somebody for documentation, not just for that sort of traditional sales playbook, which is like radically changing thanks to sales engagement platforms. That needs to be integrated in there, but even like technical documentation, and I'm sure Erica can talk at length about content supply chains and the documentation that takes.
Yeah, I think too, I'd kind of split it up into two points, especially around content, which is admin side and end user side, right? On the admin side, you really need to understand what your content matrix is. Are you going to divide something by persona, by industry, by both? Are you going to have high and low touch cadences or sequences, and why? So I think documenting what that strategy is really important. But then also it's important to have documentation for the rep so they understand how things are organized, how they're tagged, what already exists, so they're not reinventing the wheel every time they want to run a new sales motion. It's really important to have that documentation be different, because a sales rep who has a quota to hit isn't going to look through a manual that's intended for a technical admin or for a content admin and look through all of the stuff that's irrelevant to them. They need a really easy way to understand what's being provided to them and why, so they can get the most use out of it. And that's something I think it's a newer idea, but I think a lot of teams are finding it really helpful to do something like that for reps.
So there it is. That's the sales engagement functions that you need to know. Again, this is a high-level video, right? We're just touching on what each of the functions do. If you want to dive deeper, we've got videos for each of them, so you can dive deeper and learn more, educate yourself. And not all these functions need to be a headcount, but someone's got to own it. That's the biggest challenge with sales maturity that we find, is that no one owns these functions, and therefore things just don't get executed and things don't get sustained. So make sure you learn more, dive deeper, and thanks for joining us.
Hey, we hope you enjoyed this video and that you learned something that you can apply today. If you're not receiving our monthly Greaser Drip where we share our insights, make sure you go to our website and subscribe so we can get that to you. And also subscribe to our YouTube channel here so that way you don't miss any videos like this one. And don't hesitate to reach out. If you need help with your sales engagement efforts, we want to talk to you. We want to hear how we can help. And until next time, this is Houston. Over.